Locked on Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. My brother George Corkian joining me today. And your Texas Longhorns are 1-0 after beating Louisiana Monroe on Saturday. And so we have to talk about our biggest takeaways from the game, our biggest surprises from the game, and then our biggest key players from the Texas Week 1 win over Louisiana Monroe. And then we're starting another tradition here on Locked on Longhorns today. Every Sunday/Monday, we'll have Josh Neighbors on, the Locked On Big 12 host. I don't have time to watch every Big 12 game. I know you don't have time to watch every Big 12 game. You're focused on your Longhorns. So that's why we're going to bring Josh Neighbors on to tell you what's going on around the Big 12, who looks good, who doesn't look great, and who are the players you should watch out for when they face your Texas Longhorns. But starting with these takeaways from the first game of the 2022 season against Louisiana Monroe, I have three of them. And the first one was, I love how effective the Texas offense was in 12 personnel. So 12 personnel is going to be your two tight ends and one running back in the backfield. We know that that's the bread and butter of Sark's offense, and we know that they're going to utilize that a lot to get mismatches out of that, whether it's strong blocking up front with 7 people on the line of scrimmage in the run game, or, dynamic tight ends and Gunnar Helm and JT Sanders thus far coming out of that personnel to catch passes as well. If you haven't heard, Jaleel Billingsley is in the midst of a 6-game suspension. ULM was the first game, and the next 5 games will be served until the end of the Oklahoma game. And so he won't be a part of that for a while, but they definitely utilized 12 personnel to perfection, I believe, in the first game against ULM. And some of their biggest plays came out of 12 personnel. The Roschon Johnson touchdown run, that came out of 12 personnel with 2 tight ends on the field. Quinn Ewers and JT Sanders' first touchdowns of their Texas careers. Quinn Ewers threw the ball to JT Sanders. That came out of 12 personnel. Some confusion on the defense where JT Sanders was lined up at a blocker, came out on a wheel route, and nobody went with them. And then the longest play of the day, the 43-yard pass to Casey Kane, came out of 12 personnel as well, which was really interesting because the 2 wide receivers on the field were Jordan Whittington and Casey Kane rather than Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington. But Casey Kane caught like a little screen pass, a quick pass, and it took it 43 yards ultimately from being tackled. And then Bijan Robinson's, his touchdowns didn't come out of 12 personnel, but his 2 longest runs of the day came out of 12 personnel. A 21-yard run and a 13-yard run both came out of 12 personnel. And then JT Sanders, like I said, this allows you to use the tight end in so many different ways. And Sark has repeatedly said that quarterback is the most important position in sports, but the second most important position on his offense is the tight end. And JT Sanders had 6 catches for 85 yards, the most by a Texas tight end since 2007, and he did it in 3 quarters. Crazy stuff yesterday, really effective in 12 personnel. My second takeaway was Quinn Ewers played point guard, but he played it more like Chris Paul than Russell Westbrook. And what I mean by that is after his first 2 passes, the first one should have been picked. It was a bad pass to Xavier Worthy. The second one was picked. He really settled in. And we know that Quinn Ewers is a gunslinger, right? We know that he wants to throw the ball downfield. He wants to let it loose. He wants to, sling it. He wants to attack with those receivers downfield, put up points, put up yards, and really dominate opposing defenses. But what we saw him do on Saturday against Louisiana Monroe was just simply take what was there, take the check down, and get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. I know he tried 3 or 4 times to go deep to Xavier Worthy. Sark had drawn those up, and they just didn't work out. But I thought that Quinn Ewers did a great job of, like I said, playing point guard, getting the ball into his playmakers' hands really quickly and allowing them to make plays. So 10 of his 16 completions went to tight ends and running backs. So 63% of his completions either went to Bijan Robinson, Gunnar Helm, or JT Sanders. And I'm not sure that's something that we would have said going into the game. JT Sanders had 6 catches. Jordan Whittington, Xavier Worthy, and Casey Kane had 6 catches combined. So JT Sanders had the same amount of catches that Quinn Ewers' top 3 receivers had combined. That tells me that he settled into the game plan, understood what Sark wanted him to do. And most importantly, it was about getting the ball into the hands of all of these playmakers and making plays rather than Quinn feeling like he had to make the plays himself. And I thought he did a great job of that. And that's one of the hardest things for a gunslinger to learn, is to play within the offense and not be the offense themselves. And when you think of Quinn Ewers, like I said, he's somebody that wants to push the ball down the field a lot. But he had only 1 completion that traveled 20-plus yards in the air. However, I still think that Quinn Ewers had 3 wow plays on Saturday which really kind of is the difference between him and a lot of quarterbacks in the country. His ability to consistently make these wow plays. He had the 125-yard pass to JT Sanders where he kind of crept up in the pocket and kind of just flicked it down the middle of the field, and JT Sanders caught it in the bucket on the run. That was a wow play. He had another play where he kind of scrambled out to the left and baited the defender into him, but he kept his eyes downfield like he was going to throw the ball deep. And as soon as the defender committed to Quinn Ewers, he dumped it off to JT Sanders and allowed him to catch and run for 25 yards. And then he had an 11-yard dart to Jordan Whittington right before Bert Arburn missed the field goal before halftime. He had a dart in between double coverage that was perfectly thrown with perfect zip on the ball, that if it was less zip or it was in any other location, it's probably a pick six the other way. But only a few quarterbacks in college football can make that throw, and Quinn Ewers is one of them. So I thought he played really well. Once again, playing point guard, more like Chris Paul than Russell Westbrook. And then my last takeaway really quick before I let my brother George go is that the D-line was dominant. And it starts with Barryn Sorrell. He was the highest graded defender on this Texas football team, according to Pro Football Focus, with 1.5 sacks and 2 tackles for loss. Keondre Coburn was the 3rd highest graded defender. He had a sack and a tackle for loss. I thought Moral Ojamo flashed. Tamondre Sweat, Vernon Broughton, and Byron Murphy all made plays. And we'll talk about the freshman D linemen. They had a great game as well. We talked about this D line dominating and stuff in the run all offseason, but we continue to say, oh, it's against Texas, it's against a shaky offensive line. And I know Louisiana Monroe aren't world beaters either, but you have to play who's in front of you. And since the spring, this defensive line has been dominant in stopping the run, and that continued on Saturday against Louisiana Monroe, not to mention Demo and him coming off the edge and the headache that gives opposing offenses as well. So those were my 3 biggest takeaways: how effective they were in 12 personnel, how Quinn Ewers played point guard, more like Chris Paul than Russell Westbrook, and just distributed the ball to his playmakers underneath, and then how dominant the D-line was. George, what you got for us? What were your biggest takeaways?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, John. Always love chopping it up, talking a little Texas football with you.
Yes, sir.
Kind of piggybacking on the Quinn Ewers thing. It's funny. You and I were talking on the phone last week, and I said, it would not surprise me at all if we saw him, come out, guns a-blazing, throws a pick six or something on like the first play of the game, and all of Twitter and Reddit meltdown. Well, we were 1 play off. So he threw a pick on the second play of the game. And I think my biggest takeaway from that point on is, kind of piggybacking, like I said, on what you said. He was really able to kind of, internalize, hey, I made a mistake. Let's take it back a step. Let's, run through the game plan. I don't have to throw a 65-yard touchdown every single play. We're allowed to move the ball incrementally down the field and score. So after that, it was really impressive. A takeaway that I had, just the fact that he was able to kind of calm himself down, cooler heads always prevail, and was able to, from that point on, he had a couple, moments, but I thought he played about as good as you can expect a guy who hasn't played football in 2 years against someone not wearing his jersey, So that would be my first big takeaway. Second, I think I got to piggyback with you again on just how dominant the defensive line looked. I think there's definitely some kinks kind of going on in the back seven that we got to work through. I know looking at some of those PFF grades for some of the defenders, I'll let you touch more on that later, but just some stuff that's definitely a little concerning, going from ULM to, the big bad giant that Alabama is coming in next week. So definitely some stuff to work on there. But I thought the defensive line looked really impressive across the board. Snacks had a couple really nice plays. Like you said, Barryn Sorrell, in my opinion, was probably the most impressive player from yesterday's game, just on both sides of the ball. And if I had to give you a third takeaway, man, I think special teams, there's, bringing in 2 young kickers, definitely going to have some stuff to work out there. But I was really impressed with, I think it was in the third quarter, it may have been at the end of the second, but Xavier Worthy had a really nice punt return where he kind of reversed field. And there were, you could see 3 instances of guys who could have easily blocked in the back there. And just, you can tell that the special teams unit is well coached because, the hands in the air.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
You can tell that Jeff Banks has really been, coaching these guys up. And, Deshawn Jameson, man, guy has made a name for himself as a return man. I know it probably hurts your pride a little bit to be moved to blocking punts instead of returning them. first punt of the game, guy comes through with his hair on fire, blocks the punt, we scoop and score. So you can definitely tell that the special teams unit is bought in and well coached.
Yeah, those are great points. And you talked about that defensive line. Like I said, you have to play who's in front of you, and they'll obviously have their biggest test of the season next week against Alabama. But they held Louisiana Monroe to 2.2 rushing yards per carry. Right, that's elite. All right, okay, we're going to talk about our surprises, our biggest surprises from the game, and then our players of the game next. Then, of course, we're going to have Josh Neighbors at the end to talk about the biggest things going on in Big 12 play right now. But a quick word from Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor, ready, delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You're going to love the new cookie dough chunk puff, whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or just need to grab a quick bite. And Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. Ditch the calories, the fat, and the sugar, and grab yourself a Built bar. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKEDON15. All right, George. So we talked about our biggest takeaways, and I thought we had some great takeaways that really encompassed everything that happened, everything important that happened in Saturday's game against Louisiana Monroe. But it was the first game of the season. We've been talking all offseason about what we wanted to see. So naturally, there were some surprises. And I think my surprises, all of them come from the roles that the true freshmen did and did not play in Saturday's game. And then I'll let you, respond to that. So when I looked at it, first of all, Kelvin Banks and Cole Hutson do not look like freshmen. They just don't look like freshmen to me, whether it's body-wise or play style. I mean, you look at Kelvin Banks, he looks like an NFL player already, like body-wise. But when you looked at him playing the game, he didn't look like a freshman left tackle starting his first game. Quinn Ewers looked very comfortable with Kelvin Banks being his blindside blocker. And for everything I saw, he did a really good job at it. And then Cole Hutson was just a mauler at that right guard position. And there was a few times, maybe where I saw him get pushed back a little bit. For the most part, he played a really great and dominant game up there in the trenches as well. And on Bijan Robinson's touchdown run, he ran right behind Cole Hutson. And on Roschon Johnson's touchdown run, he ran right behind Kelvin Banks. And Kelvin Banks occupied two defenders on that play if you go back and watch it. So these talented running backs already know who to run behind on that offensive line, and it's the true freshman as well. And then you talk about on the defensive side. I did not expect Jaylon Guilbeau to start. And not only did he start, he was the second highest graded defender on the defense and the highest graded secondary defender, period. Right? Not just freshman, period. According to Pro Football Focus, he had an outstanding game. He had a pass deflection on the first drive. He hit the quarterback on Deshawn Jameson's pick six. He was just all over the field. And this is somebody that was suspended from team activities for a little bit over the offseason. And so the fact that he was able to come right back in, pick up where he left off as a true freshman and start his first game and be the second highest graded defender on that defense was outstanding for Jaylon Guilbeau. And then when you looked at it, Justice Finkley had a key pressure on Deshawn Jameson's pick six. I think Ethan Burke had a half a sack. He was also a top 8 graded defender on the defensive period, definitely on the defensive line. And then Dre Bledsoe was like the 5th or 6th highest graded defender on the defense period as well. So you're getting key contributions from these true freshmen you brought in already from Jaylon Guilbeau, Justice Finkley, Ethan Burke, Dre Bledsoe, Jamon Tapp looked good as well. So it feels really good to bring in these highly rated prospects, but when you can hit on them and they can come in their first game and play well right away, I think that's a huge key. We know that this is a young Texas football team, and they're going to rely on these freshmen throughout the season. But on the offensive and defensive side, I thought the freshmen came out with their hair on fire and played really well right away. My biggest kind of other surprise, as far as I talked about roles they did not play, was Brennan Thompson did not get a single snap with Quinn Ewers. And I really was surprised by that. I thought that Sark would come out right away and show off that connection between Quinn Ewers and Brennan Thompson with that 10-2 speed. I have to believe this is a little bit of gamesmanship. We obviously know that Alabama knows to prepare for Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy speed, but maybe they don't know too much about Brennan Thompson yet. Maybe Sark saving that to week 2. But I was really surprised that we didn't see the Quinn Ewers to Brennan Thompson connection, especially since we saw it in the open practice. Once again, Brennan Thompson did not get a single snap with Quinn Ewers and the ones. And so I think that might be gamesmanship. I think we do see it against Alabama, but I was surprised we didn't see it against Louisiana Monroe. So what was your biggest surprise from the game, George?
Man, my biggest surprise, just kind of touching back to the offense, how crazy that stat. I heard that stat yesterday that you read earlier with the 6 for 85 is the most since 2007.
2007, like that you would think it would be at least after Texas's prime. Like that's still when Texas was a national championship contender, right? That's crazy.
I feel like it's, at some point somebody could back their way into more than that,
And he did it in less than 3 quarters, right?
Yeah,
or I mean, especially less than 4. Yeah, like
so that was a crazy stat when I heard it. And then just to kind of add on to that, like it's very obvious who Quinn Ewers trusts the most already, at least from one game. I think JT Sanders really made himself available. There were a couple option routes that he ran where you could tell that he just kind of knew exactly where to sit. I think he really showed off as a blocker. I think he's going to be a huge, huge part of this offense moving forward, not just this year, but for the next couple of years. That's an NFL player right there, no doubt. I mean, he could have gotten some burn last year, but I'm pretty sure from a like a full game standpoint, that's kind of his first game as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's his first catch and all of that. I mean, it's tough to transition to tight end and learn how to play it at the level that Sark needs you to play it. And I just don't think he was ready last year.
No, for him to switch positions full time, pick up blocking as well as he had from what I hear on some of the other podcasts, like kind of got called out a little bit, like, hey, we really need you to do better. And instead of sulking, to kind of embrace that role, not only as a pass catcher, but as a blocker. It was evident last night that he's going to be a huge part of the offense. I was really surprised in a good way with how good he looked. And then, I'll flip it over to the defense for one more surprise. Not as surprised with the JT Sanders because we have seen him compete pretty well, but I was really, really impressed with Deshawn Jameson last night. Obviously, we know he's a phenomenal return man. He's electric. We've seen that before, but in fairness to the fans, last year we got a little frustrated watching him because it just seemed like biting on a lot of double moves, giving up a lot of big plays, missing a lot of open field tackles. And I really think yesterday, man, he just really showed up. Like I said earlier, the block punt, he probably wants to be that return man. We've seen him be absolutely electric there. So for him to be, moved to blocking punts instead of returning them, to block his first ever attempt at blocking a punt, and to have the pick six where, as Sark has said multiple times this offseason, like he's just kind of been Johnny on the spot, throughout the entire off-season training program. Like if there's a tip ball in the air, somehow Deshawn Jameson's right there. I think this is going to be a huge season for him. And I think immediately you can see that his draft stock is going to rise if we continue to see him play like he did last night. So not as surprised as JT Sanders because we've seen him do it before, but for last year to be as down as it was for him and to come out and, with that good of a performance last night, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah. Tips and overthrows, you got to get those, right? Yeah. He had a pick six. Deshawn Jameson was the 9th highest graded defender on the defense, according to Pro Football Focus. And like you said, not surprised about JT Sanders, but he still came out there and did something that hasn't been done at the 40 acres in 15 years, right? And and Jaleel Billingsley being out for the next 5 games makes that even more important. So I'm glad that he's came out and shown an elite ability to catch the football, and also shown he's very much capable of blocking in the run game. All right, we got to go to our players of the game, and we haven't talked about him enough yet, but I knew I was kind of saving him to my player of the game. But he was the best player on the field, really, on offense or defense yesterday. It was Demarvion Overshown, right? We heard all offseason about the new role that they were going to put him in, kind of a Micah Parsons type role, and he was just dominant off that edge. He had 2 tackles for loss. Really had one of the biggest plays of the game. We were going to beat Louisiana Monroe regardless, but you cannot give these lower level teams confidence or let them hang around. You got to blow them out early. And after Quinn Ewers threw that pick, ULM was able to get down to the goal line and almost score. And on that 3rd down play, they did the read option where Chandler Rogers takes the ball out of the running back's belly and tries to, run around. But before he can even run, Demarvion Overshown diagnoses the fake and sacks Chandler Rogers before he can even run out of the play, right? So it was just a crazy play that, they score if he doesn't make that play, and it ends up being a 7-7 game. Instead, it was 7-3, and by the time they scored again, Texas had 50 points, right? So Demarvion Overshown, that was a key play, but he was just all over the field, key tackles for loss, coming off that edge, really all over the field, making plays. I thought he was outstanding. And then I was going to give you an offensive play of the game, but he helped put 14 points on the board. And at the end of the year, we're going to say Texas scored X amount of points, and we're going to give all the credit to the offense. But Deshawn Jameson helped put 14 points on the field. So George already talked about how well he played. He blocked a punt. Keelan Robinson ran it in, but Deshawn Jameson did the hard stuff. And then I said on this podcast, we've been sleep on Deshawn Jameson. He's going to have at least 4 interceptions this year, and he's going to help the defense because he's either going to put the ball back in the hands of Quinn Ewers or he's going to take the ball in the end zone himself. And we saw that last night or on Saturday when he contributed, like I said, to 14 points with a blocked punt and then an interception return himself. And he's a playmaker. Like George said, he's going to get beat by double moves. He's going to take chances. But I love how you have Ryan Watts kind of playing physical on his side of the field, but you have Deshawn Jameson playing off, allowing him to just read the quarterback and break on the ball when he needs to be. That tells me that the defensive coaches, they know that he's a gambler, but they trust him to be a gambler because they know what comes on the other side of that. Once again, tips and overthrows, you got to get those, and he put 7 points on the board doing that. So who were your key players on the offensive and defensive side, George?
It's kind of hard to not go with Barryn Sorrell on defense.
Good choice.
Yeah, I think he was really impressive. Admittedly, I don't have the size to play defensive line, so I don't know as much as some others might. But hearing Sam Acho talk about on the broadcast yesterday, just some of the elite level pass rush moves that he was demonstrating. Led the team with 1.5 sacks. Probably should have been 2, but we'll give credit where it's due. I think he had 3 tackles for loss, 7 or 8 tackles. So he really just showed out in a big way. We've been hearing all offseason that he's been one of the staples of the defensive line, has really improved, not only as a pass rusher, but as a run defender. And he showed that last night. I haven't rewatched the game. I plan to, but I didn't remember seeing any bad plays from him. So, and you know what, man, on offense, I'm going to go with the low hanging fruit here. Bijan Robinson's just so good.
Yeah.
Quiet
13 touches, right? But it looked great. Yeah.
You don't even realize what he's doing. I mean, I'm looking here. He averaged 7 yards a carry. He averaged 13 yards of reception. That's a really, really quiet. What is that?
111 total yards. Yeah.
You don't
13
really
touches. That's crazy. That's almost 10 yards a touch. Yeah.
Dude is just he's so good. And I really, really hope that as a team we can help get him to New York City at the end of the year, because I don't know any, I can't probably name 5 players who are better than him offensive or defensively in the country. So I think he deserves to be in New York. The team doesn't have as much success as we hope for. Probably not going to happen, but man, just watching him, such a treasure. All Texas fans, every time he touches the ball, that's, one less that we're going to see. So, enjoy it while it lasts, because people like him just don't come around often. He's a special athlete. So
yeah, yes, sir. And they gotta try to get Bijan Robinson in a Big 12 championship game before he leaves the 40 acres. Good stuff right there from George as far as our takeaways, our surprises, and our best players on offense and defense. A quick word from the Longhorn real estate team, and then we're gonna talk to Josh Neighbors from Locked On Big 12 about who looked good in the Big 12 this weekend outside of your Texas Longhorns. Of course, Joel and Austin and Hill Country Mortgages have combined to make your Longhorn real estate team. And for all your real estate needs in the Austin area, you need to go to www.longhornrealestateteam.com. In a changing, more complex market, you need to work with the top professionals in Austin. Our data and information-driven approach gives our clients a significant advantage. And our clients for years have outperformed the market, leveraging our proprietary research, information, and expertise, which is now more important than ever. Once again, for your your real estate needs in the Austin area, make sure you're checking out the Longhorn Real Estate Team at www.longhornrealestateteam.com. Hill Country Mortgages, LLC, NMLS 2324262. Jonathan Sarver, NMLS 993872. Equal housing opportunity. All right, Longhorn Nation. So it's time for our weekly Big 12 roundup with our Locked On Big 12 host, Josh Neighbors. And Josh, I'm going to start by asking you, outside of Texas, which teams impressed you the most in the Big 12 this weekend?
I love the way Oklahoma looked. I'll start kind of with those top teams. Oklahoma looked really good. I mean, you had some questions about what are you going to get with a new coach and obviously new team, and defense looked really good. Offense looked really good, just kind of a standard performance. That's what you got a lot across the board. in this week, a lot of kind of, like what you expected type performances. Baylor, 59-point win against Albany. Iowa State, a really good 32-point win. Texas Tech wins by 53 over Murray State. The one big piece of news there, though, is Tyler Shuck goes down with a shoulder injury, was on the sideline with a sling. So that's a huge piece of news, obviously, that we get there. Donovan Smith comes in relief, looks really, really good. Those teams, I think everybody on Saturday especially took care of business. Like there were no close games at all in the entire Saturday slate for the Big 12. And considering who they were playing, that's a good thing. Obviously, from an entertainment standpoint, maybe not the best, but I think from a result standpoint, like that's kind of what you're looking for from all those teams. So that's good news.
Okay. Did anybody, you said they all looked good, and of course the competition wasn't great. Was there anybody you were expecting more from? I know Oklahoma State, after losing their defensive coordinator, gave up, I think, 40 plus. Yeah. I can't remember who they played. So maybe Oklahoma State's defense, but was there any unit or team that you thought could have played better this weekend in the Big 12?
Yeah, I think their defense could have played a lot better. Look, that game going into halftime, doing the math once again, I think it was 44, I think is what they had. 44.
Oklahoma State.
Oklahoma State had 44. Oklahoma State had 44 going into halftime. It was 44-15. The final score of that game was 58-44. So that ends up being a much closer looking box score. I never really felt like Oklahoma State was in too much of peril. Spencer Sanders looked awesome in that first half. They tried to slow things down in the second half. I mean, that's kind of what I expected to happen. Actually, Central Michigan's a pretty decent team. Like they were not bad last year. And funny enough, the other quarterback Central Michigan's quarterback ends up with more passing yards in this game. Richardson throws for 424, was actually more than what Sanders had, which is weird enough because talking about how good of a game Spencer Sanders had. And then another game that was really weird. The Kansas State game was not very competitive. I mean, they scored 20 in the first quarter. That final stat line for Martinez is really, really bad. He was 11 for 15 for 53 yards. Now, I think there was a big play that kind of made this go backwards for them. Jake Rubley was 4 for 42 yards. So I forget which play it was, but yeah, I mean, the yards for them, they were not having Martinez throw down the field at all. He did rush 13 times for 39 yards and a touchdown. So going into a game against Missouri, the good news is they pitched a shutout, right? Missouri scored 40-some points this week against Louisiana Tech. So the defense is in a good spot. The offense, kind of a workman's performance against a not very good South Dakota team. The questions kind of remain for this Kansas State offense. Like, do they have that gear they can kick it into? I think they're going to be asked to that next week. Like, can you kick it into gear at some point if you have to? So I would say Kansas State is the one team we're looking at. And then one more for you. Iowa State, Hunter Deckers looks really strong against SEMO, Southeast Missouri. They've got Iowa next week. And Jonathan, not sure if you caught this. Iowa won 7-3 yesterday over South Dakota State. They got their 7 via a field goal and 2 safeties. So, opportunity is there for Iowa State next week. There is an opportunity for if South Dakota can shut down the Iowa offense, I think Matt Campbell, Iowa State, and John Haycock have a chance to shut down Iowa as well, and also their offense too. So look, I think while it's weird, we thought last year would be the best opportunity for an Iowa State to beat in Iowa. It actually might be this season with the offense that we saw from Iowa State and the offense that we saw from Iowa. So just some observations, kind of things to think about as we look forward next week.
Yeah, so a crazy stat I saw, I hope I'm reciting this right. Iowa has won 6 games since 2020, where they've punted 8 or more times. They've won 6 games in the last 2 seasons and 1 game where they've punted 8 or more times. No other team in the FBS has done that more than twice. Right? Iowa's done it 6 times. So that's clearly their bread and butter up there in the land of the
It's just
corn.
playing defense. And that's the thing is this is
don't do anything stupid.
But you remember this last year, like this was the storyline. And Iowa did not win that game last year. Iowa State went and lost that game. So one of the big storylines, one of the things that Matt Campbell has not accomplished yet is beating Iowa. Like, obviously he hasn't won a Big 12 title yet, but they won. I mean, they won in the year 6 bowl, right? They went to a Big 12 title game. They were in there at the end of the year back in 2020. They beat Oregon in 2020 in the year 6 bowl. And now, I mean, I think they've got a really good chance at getting this next kind of, monkey off his back of not beating a team like in Iowa. They'll have to go on the road to do it in Iowa City. But I think, once again, like when you look at these performances, and I'm sure you're doing the same here in Locked On Longhorns, so much of it's trying to project, okay, what can we take from it moving forward? And so Iowa State's really the big one. When I think about like the game next week that they have against an Iowa team where it's such a big rivalry, like they might have a chance to make one of the biggest statements the entire league next weekend.
Yeah, so really quickly before I ask you about your impact players from the Big 12 this weekend, I picked Kansas State to beat Texas, but not if Adrian Martinez can't give me 100 yards of total offense, right? I was like, even if he can't pass, he's going to run for 75 to 100 yards, but he averaged 3 yards a carry, so I'm a little less scared about Kansas State and their offense thus far. What did Deuce Vaughn give us in terms of total yards?
I mean, just another day at the office for one of the best in all of college football. 18 for 126, a score, longest run of the day, was 39 yards. They really didn't use him in the passing game very much. They didn't need to. Just one catch in this game. I think that's one thing that'll be a big emphasis for them next week, is trying to get him involved in that respect. Actually, Missouri stood up pretty well against the run last week, so we'll see him getting more involved. But yeah, I mean, pretty standard day for him. Pretty standard day for him.
Another day at the office. All right, so who are some impact players, some players that really stood out this weekend in the Big 12 that you think Texas should look out for in the coming weeks?
Yeah, and I'm not doing this to do a anti or a Kansas bit over Texas thing. I actually thought Jalen Daniels looked pretty sharp. I thought Kansas played Tennessee Tech, who's not a very good team, but when they played South Dakota last year, things were not even, right? Things were not easy for them, I should say. They look like a Division I football program right now, like a Power 5 Division I football program. They pounded Tennessee Tech from the word go. Devin Neal goes for 108 yards on 4 carries and has 2 scores. Kansas rushes for nearly 300 yards. They have, 5 separate ball carriers get into the end zone. So Devin Neal gets a big tip of the cap from me from KU. He is a really good running back and could be one of the better ones in the league. I want to shout out JT Daniels from Thursday night. I know they lost the game. Yes. I tweeted about this, and West Virginia fans are coming around to it now. I thought he was really good, and he was under duress the entire evening. The 1 interception's obviously not his fault. The numbers aren't going to be very good for him in the end, but that guy's a player. And for a guy who's been injured that much, for him to keep getting up and to keep coming and being really there. I mean, he was there all night. They had to try to take him out there in the end. And obviously Pitt gets the win, but I was really impressed by the way JT Daniels led this team the other night. So I want to give kudos to him. Obviously Spencer Sanders deserves some kudos. Then a couple more things, or a couple more, another injury note here. Chandler Morris left the game for TCU in their contest, and we're back to kind of square one again. Max Duggan comes in. They were really good running the football. They were 275 yards of the ground, 4 rushing touchdowns. They took care of Colorado 38-13 thanks to a 21-point fourth quarter for them. So that was pretty substantial. And then I'm going to go Texas Tech. I thought Donovan Smith should have been the starter from the beginning. Not saying Tyler Shuck looked bad. He wasn't 6 for 10 for 154 and a score. Donovan Smith comes in 14 for 16, 221 and 4 scores. This guy is the younger of the group. Barryn Morton's the youngest, but much younger than Tyler Shuck. But he showed us last year. He's got some real ability. He can move. He's athletic. He's got a big arm, and he can be really accurate. And I think the one benefit that Texas Tech has, Jonathan, is that they have one of the best. They have the deepest quarterback room in the entire conference, right? They've got Barryn Morton, Donovan Smith, and Tyler Shuck. Those are 3 guys actually a lot of schools would like to start. And I think there's other Big 12 schools that would like to start at least one of those 3 guys. So I'm gonna go there and say that was really impressive. Also, Taj Brooks for them, 3 touchdowns on the ground, and their defense, which we have a lot of questions about, played really well too. So I want to shout out Texas Tech and Joey Mcguire although they lost one quarterback, the benefit of having one of the deepest quarterback rooms is they've got a guy who is, a really good player and showed it last year in Donovan Smith and showed it again, 4 scores and, the less than 15 completions that he had.
Yeah, great stuff, man. Keep you up to date on everything in the Big 12. I'm going to get you out of here on this, man. Outside of Texas, Alabama, what is the biggest game that a Big 12 team is involved in next Saturday?
We got one Big 12 team playing up against a future Big 12 team, Baylor and BYU.
The Holy War. The Holy War.
We might get several versions of the Holy War in here, the Big 12. I mean, you might get Utah versus BYU if that ever happens, but you're going to get BYU versus TCU and BYU versus Baylor. So you're going to get multiple Holy Wars. So BYU throttled USF this week and looked really good doing it. They've got an awesome offense. Baylor, their offense looked really good too, albeit it was against Albany. But I think this has a chance to be – I think this will be an awesome game next week in Provo, Utah. It's a night game, 10 o'clock, ESPN, so kind of maybe a Big 12 after dark type feel to it. But I'm excited for this game because it's not a conference game, but it almost feels like one because we're going to see this be a conference game at least starting next year. So I'm fired up for that game. 2 top 25 teams. It's one of the only times that we're going to see – I think it's actually the only top 25 matchup we have in the non-conference schedule for Big 12 teams right now, like a Big 12 top 25 team going up against a non-Big 12 team that's top 25. So there you go. Next week, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock Central Time on ESPN, Baylor and BYU.
Wow, that's great. I did not realize the Holy War was week 2. Do you want to pick that game right now, or do you want to wait a little bit closer?
I'll tell you, I'm leaning BYU. I think there's a chance. I think there's a big chance too. I've been saying this a bunch. I think this is like the game that could propel Baylor to a Big 12 championship because I think it could be like that learning experience. I think Blake Shapen might need one of these games where it's a rough environment and he plays really well or doesn't play well, but I think this could be an excellent learning experience for them no matter what happens, and win or lose because it's a non-conference game. I actually think this game is going to be really instrumental for them in whatever their season ends up, and I think it actually helps the fact they're playing a really good team on the road at this point to prepare them for whatever comes their way. So I think BYU wins, but maybe actually helps Baylor in the long run.
Hey, good stuff, right? So we had our takeaways, surprises, and our key players from the Texas ULM game with George Korkian, and then we had our first edition of the Big 12 Roundup with our Locked On Big 12 host, Josh Neighbors. Make sure you're subscribing to Locked On Big 12 on YouTube and listening to Locked On Big 12 wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, Longhorn Nation, peace.